Hey guys, welcome back. This is the story about what if Naruto was a hollow. Before we start, please subscribe to the channel and like the video as well, it really means a lot. So let's start the what if. The swirling vortex of Ryatsu that was once Naruto continued to buffet around for over 5 minutes. The other hollows didn't dare move from their position to get a closer view, as they would surely be torn to pieces the instant they touched it. They didn't even move a muscle from their prone from bowing, as they knew that their king deserved no less than their full respect with what he was about to become. As the vortex of Ryatsu finally began to dissipate, the hollows around watched with bated breath, almost begging to know what had happened to their king, or whether he was alright. Although the torrent had disappeared, there was still the glowing orange Ryatsu figure standing where the torrent once blew. It seemed to bear some resemblance to Naruto, though it was difficult to tell because it was morphing, of all things. The Ryatsu figure, which the hollows now realized was their king, was rapidly going from a quadrupedal being into a bipedal being, though the being was almost a silhouette, so they had trouble picking out what was happening beyond that. There was a loud cracking noise, and the hollows winced, guessing that the figure was having its bones rearranged throughout the transformation process. However, the figure didn't morph anymore after that, and it howled towards the Huecomundo crescent moon, before slamming its orange limbs into the dirt and drawing up an enormous cloud of dust that obscured the view of it from others. But, beyond that cloud, the orange Ryatsu coating the thing's body was fading, and when the dust cloud dispersed completely, the hollows took in their king's new form. He stood on 2 legs, but managed to look just as feral as when he was in a jutsus. He was slightly on the short side, measuring in at only about 5.5 feet tall, though that didn't make him look any less menacing. The vulpine mask that adorned his face had flattened out, losing its snout while its ears rose vertically in points instead of being combed back along his snout. There was red war paint that ran down from the ears, to below his eyes and towards the bridge of his nose, where they curled into twin spirals on opposite sides. His teeth were all sharp incisors, which had curled up into a toothy grin that managed to be even more psychotic now. He remained red in color, but this time the light bony armor covered every portion of his body, leaving no fur visible. Even the claws on both his hands and feet were covered in the stuff, which made them seem even sharper. His 9 tails waved around freely, not looking even slightly out of place on a body that small. They too were covered in the red armor in every portion except the tips. The tips of the tails were hollow and open, the only material there being the bare minimum structure. These had hollow, open lines running down the length of the tail into his main body. It was almost like the tips of the tail were lanterns, the flame meant to be contained within them. His 2 prominent shoulder spikes remained in place, along with numerous other spines all along his elbows, knees, and hips. But there was a completely new addition to his body on his torso. Below his hollow hole, where Kyuubi's seal once lay, and on a much thinner layered portion of his body, there was an enlarged spiral of red Ryatsu. It glowed and crackled with energy, and curiously enough, his shoulder spines ran underneath his skin to connect to the outside of the spiral. The spiral was flanked by sharp points of armor that resembled a predator's jaws, which were located on the upper layer of his armor. "Vasto Lorde," muttered one of the hollows closest to the powerful hollow. The new Vasto Lorde heard it, and he laughed slowly. First, just a small chuckle, but this soon evolved into full-blown laughter, which he had directed straight towards the heavens themselves. It was the happiest he had laughed in years, which was saying a lot for a hollow like this. But, like anyone who stays around this particular hollow for long periods of time, it makes one on edge. Like his happiness isn't supposed to be a good thing. He didn't say a word, but he didn't need to in order to show his glee towards the situation. Things were beginning to look up for him now, and at this rate, forming the most powerful kingdom in Huecomundo would be a snap. Naruto's evolution had stirred awake all 4 of his generals awake, and they were surprised as everyone else to see their superior as a full-on Vasto Lorde. The sight was gratifying, to say the least. He turned and looked at the cave complex, his new capital. A lot of work would have to be done to this place if he ever wanted to turn it into the sprawling empire that he had wanted. Also, this battle with Drindo had opened his eyes to the worthlessness of humanoid hollows. There was no way he was going to allow any non-animal hollows in his kingdom. Animal hollows were more in touch with themselves anyway, not fancying themselves as humans. He would form the antithesis to Drindo's kingdom, the Reino Animal, a kingdom of nothing but animal hollows. This would also serve as a mockery towards the dead Vasto Lorde. There was also the matter of Konoha. He wasn't satisfied with taking their lives anymore. He had to do something special for them, so he could fully enjoy his sweet revenge. He would create the perfect plan for them, no matter how long it took, no matter what methods he had to use, and no matter who he had to sacrifice. And the good news was, he had all the time in the world for it as well. To say Minato was panicking right now would be an understatement. Even if this wasn't his first time going through this, the shock value of it all had hardly diminished with experience. Besides, it's not like adding a new member to the family should ever be a bland experience, and it wasn't. It was always a stressful, yet rewarding experience that paid off in the end. However, in his heart, Minato always knew that they would have more kids the instant he and Kushina had both learned that children could be born within the Soul Society. Though they had decided to wait a little while until they had gotten properly adjusted within the afterlife, what better time to have a kid when his wife had become the vice-captain of the 3rd Division, after their captain died and the vice-captain took his place. But, it turns out that the birth experience wasn't any different from how it was in life. From the sounds of moaning and screaming inside the maternity ward, it was still painful as hell, and the woman was more or less a wild animal to her husband/lover. With a woman like Kushina, it was this times 10, which was why Minato was both battered and bruised. She had even thrown the 4th Division members who were supposed to be helping with the birth across the room. Though, in the end, despite all the jitters and pain, it was worth it to hear that first cry and the calming of the mother as the birthing process finally subsided, and he was able to breathe easily for the first time in 24 hours. Yep, all worth it to hear those first 2 cries come from over on the bed. 2 cries, he thought, slowly comprehending exactly what that meant. A 4th Division member noticed his being on the ground after being knocked away by Kushina, and quickly helped the 3rd seat of the 5th Division to his feet. She gestured over to his wife, who was happily holding 2 babies, a soft, maternal smile on her face. "Congratulations, Minato-sama," said the medical Shinigami, a soft smile on her face. "Your wife has successfully given birth to a set of twins. One a girl, and the other a boy." Minato felt his mouth run dry, as the 4th Division member allowed the former shinobi to approach the bed, and catch his first glimpse at his 2nd and 3rd children. They were both wrapped up in bundles, obscuring what type of build they had from him. But, he could tell that despite being different genders, they looked almost exactly the same as one another, except for the obvious gender differences. They both had tufts of red hair on their heads, the exact same shade. The one on the left, the older twin, opened her eyes to show a soft cerulean that stared back at him with wonder. Her slightly younger brother mimicked her over to the right, his blue eyes being slightly more piercing. Minato bent down and gave both babies kisses on the foreheads, prompting them both to giggle in unison. Kushina also giggled at the display of affection, as her husband pulled back to look at all 3 of them warmly. Yet, none of them, even the nurses and 4th Division members, found any words necessary to add to this touching family. Things are beginning to look up even more, Minato thought, as he turned a wistful eye to the ceiling, before turning back towards his wife so they could settle on names. 60 years later. "Story daddy, story," a little red-headed girl squealed, as her father carried her into her particularly large bedroom that she shared with her twin brother. Ever since Kushina had become a vice-captain 60 years ago, and had given birth to twins, the family had moved out of the Shinigami barracks, and bought their own mansion, near the other noble houses of Soul Society. Minato smiled before holding her at arm's length, placing her down on her twin bed. Her brother was already in his bed to the right of her, but he was still awake, clearly also waiting for the story his sister so coveted. Minato chuckled at the hyperactive girl, before kissing her on the forehead, walking to her brother and doing the same to him, and then moving up to the nightstand between the 2 beds. He opening the drawer, seeing the stack of books that were somewhat disorganized. Don't worry, Akane-chan. I haven't forgotten about your story. Truth be told, the twins had already heard most of these stories several times. They were both going on 60 years old after all, even they were still mentally and physically 4 to 5 years old. Sometimes he hated how everyone here aged so slowly, but most of the time he just enjoyed the time he had with his family. Here's a book I haven't read you, Akane-chan, Taiki-kun. He said with mild surprise, thinking that he truly had read all the children's books that had in the house. Akane started clapping enthusiastically at the thought of a new story, while Taiki merely smiled a truly radiant grin. He read over the title of the book once again, grinning and laughing to himself lightly. I can't believe I've never read this story to you two before. It's a classic tale renowned throughout Seoul society, practically a legend in its own right, he said. Akane seemed to get even more excited, getting the feeling that she was in for a good story. Minato cleared his throat, bringing rapt attention from his two children. Once upon a time, the Shinigami in Seoul society lived in harmony with one another, vanquishing hollows and ferrying good souls to the afterlife, where they could live in happiness with one another. He paused. The darker aspects of the job were glossed over, but that was to be expected from a children's book. But, one day a powerful Hollow King, deep from the recesses of Huecomundo, found his way into Seoul society, and using his army, he spread terror across the peaceful land. Both of the children gasped at the horror of the realization. Minato let a soft smile come onto his face. With great power at his command, he managed to conquer nearly all of Seoul society, and obtain what he wanted. A great key, more sought out than anything else, that could break the reincarnation cycle of souls and alter the flow of them between Seoul society, the human world, Huecomundo, and the realm where bad souls go. With all of his deeds done, the Hollow turned to his final goal, the realm of the Spirit King, where he could awaken the key's power and bring his plan to send all the good souls to the realm of bad souls. He raised his voice for dramatic effect. Taiki looked slightly frightened, though Akane had covered her mouth and an exaggerated gasp. But, as all hope was lost for both Shinigami and Hollow, a strange old Shinigami appeared in front of the Hollow. Using his formidable powers, he vanquished the King Hollow and his army back into Huecomundo from whence he came. Putting the key back in its rightful place, he restored order throughout the land for all souls to live happily ever after. The end. He said, showing the two children a picture of an old Shinigami fighting an angular chimera-like Hollow with a crown. Akane squealed in delight at the heroic tale, jumping out of her bed and brandishing an invisible sword. It was no secret that she wanted to be a Shinigami just like her parents. Minato laughed out loud and scooped up the hyperactive girl, placing her back in the bed. Easy there, my little Shinigami. It's just a made-up tale, he said to calm the girl down. She snuggled back underneath the covers of her bed, once again smiling at her father. Good night, Akane, Taiki. I love you, he whispered. Both kids responded with a simple, love you too, daddy, before they closed their eyes, and Minato wandered from the room after taking one last look at them. As he shut the door quietly, he heard Light giggling right to him. No matter how many times I see it, that always gets me. Kushina chuckled. Minato blushed slightly, now realizing that she had been watching him read the story since the beginning. I didn't take you as the type to get so mushy, she mused, laughing again at her husband. It was meant as a joke, of course. She had seen him read his kids' stories many times. Well, what did you expect? Both of them are going to become fine Shinigami one day, and I want to hold on to them as long as I can, especially since. He trailed off, a look of sadness appearing on his visage. Kushina mimicked that expression, grasping the implications of what he was saying immediately. Naruto. She trailed off like her husband, and Minato swore he could see a small tear appear in her eye. However, as soon as it had come, the sadness clouding over her expression had disappeared. She placed a hand of comfort on her husband's shoulder, which he thankfully grasped. I know our last search for him was unsuccessful, but we shouldn't give up hope, Minato. He's out there in Seoul society somewhere. It's a large place, and we're lucky we have the resources to search for him. Most people don't get a chance like this. We can only tell ourselves that wherever he is, he's happy, and living a good and fruitful life." She whispered. "Yeah, you're right. We should count ourselves lucky we're able to see so many of the family and friends that we had in life. I just want us to be reunited with our son." He smiled sadly. "We will, Minato. We will." In the 60 years needed to build his own kingdom that rivaled Baragon's, Naruto had flourished and created a sprawling kingdom that became well known within Huecomundo. He had taken over numerous smaller kingdoms, many of which were run by more of Baragon's former advisors. It was no longer a kingdom, and Naruto was no longer a king. He was an emperor, and his domain was one of the greatest empires ever seen in Huecomundo, or the human world for that matter. The cave complex served as his capital, of sorts, though it had long since become a grand palace, that while wasn't on par with the size of Baragon's, fulfilled all the basic functions needed while housing the majority of his subjects. He had built the thing out of a different, yet similar structured material than Baragon's Las Noches, to which he had found a quarry of the stuff across the ocean, in some of the new territory he had conquered. All remnants of the cave complex, once being rock, had completely disappeared, as he had destroyed the Great Plateau once he had the resources. Now only the Great Palace, a brilliant display of red and white, rose out of the ground, facing the sea to potentially ward off future enemies. Like Las Noches, it had a domed roof, but there were many more windows on the palace. Instead of 4 pillars flanking the cardinal directions of the compass, there was a large tower rising out of the dome. It looked almost phallic, but considering Naruto's lewd nature, this was probably intentional. It was in this phallic structure where Naruto made his throne room, so he could look out across the expanse of Huecomundo, almost like he was a higher being than all of them. Out of the palace at the 4 cardinal directions, there were significant large chambers jutting out of the main palace, and these served as the chambers of Naruto's 4 generals, who had loyally served him all these years, even the rebellious Neutra. However, these 4 hollows were just about the only beings in Huecomundo who served him loyally. Living conditions were not good for the rest of the hollow in the kingdom, and most of them followed him out of pure fear rather than respect. The things he had done made even a ruthless hollow cringe. And out of the 4 generals, Grimmjow and Neutra were just as ruthless as Naruto. Ulquiorra didn't care about the meager lives of those he considered trash, and Haribel was blissfully in the dark about her king's ways. His boundaries spread all the way back west towards Las Noches, stopping where Baragon had drawn the line between the 2 rivaling kingdoms. He even managed to cross the ocean fully, and take some of the new land that lay across it, where an entirely different set of hollows cut off from the other mainland existed. Despite all his successes on the front of Huecomundo, the Kitsune Vasto Lorde was thinking about things, sulking as he did so. The last 60 years of his life, he had spent doing nothing but taking more land, resources, and hollows so he could stick it to the Soul Society, and more importantly, Konoha. This was the Reino Animal, a kingdom of nothing but animal-based hollows. All the humanoid ones he had expelled or even exterminated long ago, when he had decided that they weren't of use to him anymore. Not that they were ever of much use in the first place. Drindo had been a moron to believe that they were inherently superior to animal hollows. In the highest tower overlooking the vast plain and the sea in front of them, a small hollow sat on his ornate throne in a relaxed position, tossing a rock into the air and catching it easily. Do I have enough power to challenge Soul Society right now? He asked himself, there being no guards or anything of the like in his throne room. He didn't need anything like that, especially when he said his plans out loud and didn't want anyone to hear them. Konoha would definitely go down right now if I decided to attack them, but I've been so busy these past decades that I haven't even thought of how I'm going to go beyond just killing them. But, who I am kidding saying I have enough power to eliminate Soul Society? Not even. He turned his gaze to the bookshelf he had behind his throne, the most prominent one sticking out severely. He had enough power to thwart the Soul Society, not before he was stopped by the Sotaishu. I definitely need to build more power and intelligence. Intelligence is an important factor as well. If I could just archive the list of current captains and their abilities, That would make this whole thing so much fucking easier. But, where am I gonna get something like that, he mused to himself, before lounging down sideways upon his throne. Ugh, this is so frustrating. Barrigan's stupid ass has prevented me from moving against anyone else in the past couple years, now that he's finally labeled me as a threat. It won't help me at all if I stagnate in my growth of power, and it looks like I'm no closer to figuring out just how to turn a hollow into an Aaron car than I was before. We did find that orb almost 50 years ago. Indeed, one of the bolas to evolution laid tightly secure on a pedestal directly to the right of Naruto's throne. However, despite being in the possession of one of the sacred orbs, Rapporo's notes on Arancarization were very complex, and neither he nor the other top hollows in the Reino animal could make sense of it. It would be so much easier to figure this out if I had a professional scientist or accomplished researcher within my kingdom. That is, if I didn't hate their very guts, considering that they remind me of Konoha with how experiment happy they are. But, it's tearing me apart how I can't get any closer to the secret of Arancarization. The fox Vasto Lorde hopped off his throne, and began pacing around the room. This feeling is just as bad as when I was trapped within Barrigan's arena. Naruto trailed off, as something clicked within Naruto's mind at that very moment. Thoughts of Konoha, the arena, and scientists all melded together within his mind to form an idea. A brilliant, yet awful idea had hatched itself within his head, at the thought of all of these things. A cruel grin alit underneath his mask, and the taken-aback hollow sat down on his throne, as his eyes widened further as the idea began to hatch itself more and more within his head. It was perfect. Absolutely perfect. It would be the best thing for him to do. It would take a long time for him to get this together, but it would all be worth it in the end to see this plan come into fruition. He charged some Reiatsu into this strange panel he had on the left side of his throne, watching as an image of the interior of his palace appeared in midair. Overall, the interior of the palace looked somewhat similar to Barrigan's, with the clear night sky visible overhead. It lacked any visible settlements or features outside the doors to the chambers of the four generals. The majority of his populace lived underground, in colonies or groups in an environment similar to the cave complex the place had been before. The only time normal subjects of his were allowed on the surface was when they were charged with subjugated more hollows. Most of them ate each other underground, as there were no laws of any kind against the eating of your comrades. Because of this, the palace was always in chaos underground, despite the pristine image of order above the surface. He talked into the screen, knowing that his voice would be reverberated all throughout the palace, reaching everyone except for Haribel, who he had been keeping in the dark about his more unpleasant side. Hell, he didn't use her much, and she preferred to keep to herself in her own wing of the palace. Attention, all my wonderful fuckheads out there. This is your awesome emperor speaking, and I'd like to talk about the direction I'm going to be taking this place from now. Obviously, we need to raise our military power even further, but I'm instilling a little side project that we're going to pursue. You see, for those of you who don't know, I have a little, teensy tiny, itty-bitty problem with my old village from when I was a human. Naturally, I want to see it disappear off the face of the earth, he snorted, laughing loudly, as many hollows underground once again questioned their emperor's sanity. But, I'm not satisfied with simply taking their lives. Oh no. I want to go for something far beyond that, he roared dramatically, before he squealed giddily, before panning through the holographic image about the barren surface world. Well, I guess anywhere will do. He mused, stroking his mask. Anyway, I know you all just finished building the palace a few years, but we're going to construct a few more features along the surface. You understand, right? I knew you would, he laughed, knowing full well that there would be many hollows who would not be happy with this. I'm also opening up a new position of power besides my 4 military generals and the Hollow Council, which has no power, just filled with whiny idiots who think they make a difference. He thought to himself before chuckling in his mind. He only made that council so he could stop listening to all his bitches subjects. Maybe I'll kill them all later. This will be the Reino Animal's own institution of scientific research, but to form such a thing, I need scientists. And someone with greater scientific knowledge to lead the institute. To stress the importance of this, the leader has the exact same amount of power as one of my generals. So, I order you to go out there and bring me scientists to work for me. Those who do will surely be handsomely rewarded with enough hollows to cause one to evolve, he shouted, making sure to give them all an incentive to go out and find someone with scientific knowledge. Did I just say enough hollows to cause one to evolve? I meant that they will be rewarded with death, but oh well. He panned the screen to see some hollows looking very interested at the prospect of free food, and already a few of them were beginning to shuffle out of their homes and out to the surface. Still, this is going to take a very long time. Probably 10 years to gather all the necessary scientists, and another 30 to finish all the construction, and there's no telling how long it will take the researchers to finish the projects that I order them to do. I suppose Konoha and the Shinigami are going to live for another day, he thought sullenly, the long wait that this project has effectively destroying any semblance of a good mood that he had had before. All I have to do is wait. So, Senor Aporo Grands, tell me why I should allow you to become the head scientist in my kingdom, he said formally to the nervous-looking worm-like Ajuchas, while relishing in the intimidation he brought over other hollows. Even if that blank mask obscured any visible emotions that the hollow might be displaying, he could just feel the tension in the air. Maybe it was the fact that it was just the two of them in the throne room, with no guards to save the weaker hollow should the emperor in front of him decide to attack. He was vaguely aware of the window behind him that he could use to escape, but even then. Naruto's recruitment process had taken the kingdom quite some time, as Huecomundo wasn't exactly known for its brilliant scientists. Most of the hollows he had interviewed had abilities that gave them an advantage in the field of study, but they lacked the raw intelligence that was needed to truly strive. In Sale's case, he had both, and he was in fact a fairly brilliant researcher in his own right. The only question was, would it be good enough for the hollow in front of him? Well, Naruto-sama. We have gone over the necessary requirements and skills needed to take the position of head scientist in the Reino animal. I dabble mainly in biology, but I also have the necessary skills in chemistry and physics. Sale said, trying to persuade the fox Vasto Lorde. Naruto looked contemplative, but he rolled his eyes over to the side lazily. And you know exactly what I'm looking for, correct? He said in a bored tone, turning a half-lidded eye in Sale's direction. Might I add, sir, that even with the required skills, this entire endeavor is going to be very lengthy. What you are asking for is not going to be an easy venture, and with all the necessary construction needed, it's going to take even longer, Sale said. Oh, I'm more than aware of how long and difficult this process is going to be. Naruto replied, his expression now fully focused on the Ajuchas in front of him. But time is not the issue here. I just need a researcher with a suitable pedigree to do this for me, and so far no one has been able to meet those qualifications. I'm hoping that you'll be able to change that. If you meet my expectations, you have all the time in the world to complete this project. Not to mention, some of the other perks that you'll be receiving. Sale knew just what he was talking about. He would be equivalent to one of Naruto's 4 generals, and would be given free reign over anyone lesser in rank than himself, that of which was everyone in the Reino animal save for 5 other hollows. What that meant was that he could basically do anything he wanted to them, within reason. I've made my decision. Naruto shouted, jolting Sale from his thoughts. You may know this already from the other scientists in my kingdom, but there's a very specific test I give to those looking for the position. Sale stared at him in confusion. You see, it's because of the test's insane difficulty that I have yet to find myself a head scientist who can supervise and perform my orders to their fullest extent. However, if you can pass this test, then I will trust you with anything and everything related to science and technology, the fox explained. What do I have to do, Naruto-sama? It's simply, really simple, yet challenging. You see, around the time I formed this kingdom, I came into the possession of one of the bolas de evolution, which would allow us hollows to blur the boundaries between Shinigami and hollow, and effectively become Arankar. However, the secret to Arankarization is not so easily cracked. The procedure is intensely complicated and difficult to understand. So, my task for you is this: unravel the methods of aeroncarisation and duplicate the effects in your lab. I'll throw in a little advantage, my treat. Unlike past competitors, you have all the time you need to complete this research, as you'll be staying here and working on it in our own personal facilities. See to it that you don't fail my expectations. He finished his sentence in a low undertone, any pretense of amiability completely gone. His visage was now set on a grim, serious look, and Sale found it hard to look away from the vasto lorde. The researcher bowed deeply, allowing his wings to go limp as he held one of his wiry appendages to his chest. He raised one eye underneath his mask to look at the king, who was getting off his throne and walking towards the right, where the apparent bola de evolution was being displayed. The bookcase behind the well-guarded display was where the emperor was headed for, as he grabbed an apparently ancient tome, and a thick stack of notes almost as long as the book itself. This is El Libro de Ciclos, written by the legendary Hollow Reporo, who launched a nearly successful attack on Soul Society. This book contains many secrets that I have taken quite the interest in. But the only section in this tome you need to worry about is the one on aeroncarisation. And that is where these come in. He held out the stack of notes to Sale. The El Libro de Ciclos does in fact explain how to aeroncarize, but what the other scientists have discovered is that the book only explains aeroncarisation through the context of that ancient kingdom. It was over 1,000 years ago, after all. In addition to being incredibly complex to figure out, the hollow species as a whole has evolved since then, so the methods of aeroncarisation used during the time of the kingdom will no longer work today. Naruto explained. Your task is to use these notes and what's inscribed with the book to figure out a reliable method for aeroncarisation that can be replicated. You're pretty lucky. I'm giving you all the time you need, plus you have all the resources left behind by hollows that took this test before you. I hope you won't let me down after putting so much faith in you. Naruto said with a hint of threatening in his voice that wasn't difficult to pick up on. Sale took the stack of notes from his employer, leafing through the pages lightly while trying to get a general gist of what was going on here. His eyes narrowed underneath his mask, noting the many complex mathematical equations that littered the margins. The institution for research is a big, rectangular building dead ahead after you exit the tower. Honestly, you can't miss it. Talk to one of the scientists there to learn about the rules and procedures for it. Sale nodded. If you'll allow me to take my leave then, he said, bowing lightly to Naruto. Naruto nodded, and Sale clutched the leaflet of notes in his hands, determined to get to the root of this problem as soon as possible. He walked out of the throne room, shutting the large door behind him as Naruto stared him down. Naruto really had to hand it to Sale. He did it. The rising scientist managed to produce and replicate a suitable method to harness the full power of the bola de evolution. In other words, they had cracked the secret to aeroncarisation. It had taken nearly 20 years, with many tests and experiments needed to reproduce the full extent. Apparently, it was much more complex than even Naruto gave it credit for. Sale was just lucky he had an infinite amount of time to complete his test, even with all the other candidates for the position taking the same test while he did. But even still, his plan was far from over. Even with the secret to aeroncarisation unlocked, there were still many things that needed to be accomplished. They needed to take more territory for one thing. Materials and other resources were scarce, and he needed it for the construction and the tools necessary for Sale to work his magic. Even aeroncarisation had to wait. Although it was simple to turn some of his soldiers into aeroncar, it had to be delicate on a personal level. Aeroncarisation was a big thing after all, and he wanted to be at the strongest he could possibly be when he aeroncarized. As much as he hated to admit, he wasn't at the peak of his condition. Although he was a vasto lorde, there was still much more room for improvement. To top it all off, he could no longer just gain strength through eating hollows. At this stage in his development, the only way to get stronger was to do old-fashioned training. Speaking of Sale, the new head scientist of the kingdom was currently stationed in his throne room, going over the various procedures necessary for aeroncarisation. And so, aeroncarisation will eventually occur when the hollow in question supplies a specific amount of Ryatsu into the bola. The amount of newtons necessary differs for every individual hollow, but when equilibrium with the bola occurs, and the Reiatsu output is matched, a reaction will inevitably take place which will result in Aaron-Karasation. Naruto grinned. Good work, Sale. Your potential in the scientific field has shown well. I know that you're already appointed as my head scientist, but I think more congratulations are in order, he said politely. Think nothing of it, Naruto-sama. I am just happy to be of service to you. I feel that I must also mention that the formula needed to figure out Reiatsu equilibrium has been drafted by me personally. If you wish to rankerize yourself or one of your subjects, I implore you to visit the institution first so we may clear any chances of failure, Sale replied. Naruto leaned back. I understand, Sale. I believe we can begin Aaron-Karasation for some of the lesser hollows in the kingdom, but I can't quite use it on myself yet, unfortunately. That goes for you and the generals, as well. Our full potential has not been fully realized yet, and it would be such a shame to allow that to go to waste. We will hold off on Aaron-Karasation for the time being. For now, you will focus on your new duties. Once we can procure enough resources to undertake the operation, Naruto said, grinning at the thought of his scheme. As you wish, Naruto-sama, chuckled Sale underneath his breath. This new position really was all it was cracked up to be, and with Naruto's plan in the works, there was a treasure trove of knowledge waiting to be uncovered. I suggest you get started on those first. They are the most important part of the plan, and without them I can't achieve what I want. Come to me with the blueprints to them, and maybe then we can start mass-producing them. Sale bowed again, making sure it was long and drawn out, as his career depended entirely on his new king's orders. Konoha was the village that controlled the entire continent. It had all started around 150 years ago, when the greatest Hokage in history, the Rokudame, found a way to harness the chakra of the great fox Kyubi for the village's purposes. With its power at the village's disposal, and the breeding of super shinobi through the use of the chakra, Konoha waged war against the other shinobi nations of the world for its righteous cause of conquering. The glorious will of fire would be spread throughout the entire world. And with the odds heavily in their favor, Konoha succeeded. Once Iwa fell to Konoha, the others fell like dominoes, each one vying for some territory within the former Tsuchi no Kuni, and each one getting into some sort of conflict with Konoha and the Hai no Kuni. One after another, they were crushed and assimilated within the empire. And, after 30 years of fighting, the continent was theirs. The 5 great shinobi nations were no more, and now there was only one country, the Hai no Kuni and its linchpin Konoha. Everything else was just a simply colony of the Hai no Kuni. And Konoha benefited gloriously from it. The village was now 5 times the size it was since before the war, with several advancements in both shinobi theory and technology. The Hokage monument still stood at the forefront of the village, its last face considered the greatest Hokage in history. The Kyubi chakra plan reached perfection 100 years before, and even a genin implanted with the stuff was massively skilled in using the chakra. They were so much stronger that a genin of today would probably be the equivalent of a high-level jonin from over a century ago. The Hokage mansion remained relatively untouched over the years, and today a tall, lean man was leaning over the balcony of his roof, looking over the beloved village that he led. Shimura Daisuke was a great-something nephew of the Rokudame, Danzo. He was about 25 years old, with an angular handsome face, and a short head of straight, blonde hair. This man, who was skilled in the usage of Bija chakra, ruled over the village as the 17th Hokage, a title he had long coveted. The day he received it was the second proudest moment of his life, and one that he had fulfilled less than a year ago. His proudest moment had occurred just the other day. His newborn daughter had been born less than 2 weeks ago. To add to the proud father moment, it turned out that she had an exceptionally powerful reaction to the Kyubi implants injected into her. With any luck, she was a contender for 18th Hokage. They just needed to train her right. Her had named her Kanahaji, after the village that he loved so much. He had no doubt that she too would grow to love the village that was in her namesake. He wished that were the case with all his heart, as this village was something that was worth loving. She looked so much like him, it was uncanny. Bright blue eyes, blonde hair, and two peculiar little whisker marks on each of her cheeks, which seemed to signify her close connection with the Kyuubi's chakra. She was a happy baby, which Daisuke was content with, and he hoped he could keep the girl happy throughout her full life. Naruto-sama! Naruto-sama, cried one of Naruto's fastest messengers, who had found the king after he had mysteriously disappeared. The search had spread far and wide. With Naruto's grand project almost done, many were beginning to wonder if their king was beginning to get cold feet on the whole ordeal. Eventually, a group of his soldiers had claimed to have spotted him almost 30 miles inland on the next continent, a place almost completely untouched by desert hollows such as Naruto. This place was a dense jungle of trees, making it much more difficult for the search party to navigate. But eventually, their smallest and weakest messenger had found their king standing in a large clearing of sorts. As Naruto turned around to acknowledge his presence, the messenger noticed that the trademark spiral over Naruto's stomach was dimmer than usual. In fact, he looked somewhat drained. "We've found you, my lord. Where have you been these past few months, Naruto-sama? Ulquiorra-sama has taken to ruling over El Reino animal in your stead," the messenger asked tentatively, choosing his words carefully. Naruto grinned. "What? I'm king, so that means I can take my leave anytime I want. Unless you're making complaints about that." "You complainin', eh?" asked Naruto wheezily, getting up in the messenger's face. "And no, sir. It's just, we were worried," the messenger trailed off nervously, the excuse sounded somewhat useless to his ears. "Worried? Somehow, I doubt that." Naruto's eyes never left the messenger. "Anyway, since the so important you must know what I was up to, I'll have you know that I was traveling to perfect my latest combat move. And, from the looks of things, it seems I've perfected it." He turned to look behind him, into the strange clearing. "These past 100 years since we've covered the secret to Arankarisation have been grueling for us. We've taken lots of territory, and gained the resources necessary. The only thing missing is the completion of sales preparations. But, there was always one thing that bugged me more than anything so far. And now, I've solved it," he chuckled darkly. "I'm ready," he muttered cryptically. Naruto got up from the base of the tree, and began walking in the opposite direction, back towards camp. But, something was on the messenger's mind. "Wasn't there some sort of hollow kingdom right on this spot, Naruto-sama?" he asked. "Yeah, it actually began right at this clearing. Why don't you go take a look?" "I'll be heading back now," he remarked offhandedly, which greatly confused the messenger. Out of perplexity, the small hollow walked forward into the clearing, noting that the ground here seemed to be singed. The messenger raised his eyes up to see what was in front of him, and they widened like saucers. "What the hell?" Naruto grinned as he walked through the jungle. Back in his throne room, Naruto pored over the notes that Reporo had left them all, in an internal debate over how he should go about this particular business. His team of scientists had already gotten writing the particular Arankar formula for him, as well as making sure that the facility was in perfect condition for the arrival of their king. "I guess I had better get going, then. This has gone on for far too long, and now it's time for me to evolve into the perfect being." The emperor hoisted himself from his throne, and walked out of the room. His guards outside bowed as he exited the main building and descended into the reaches below. The few denizens who lived on the surface seemed to shy away from him in fear, a fact that Naruto took great pride in. Everyone gave him a wide berth as he made his way over to the institution, and only the guards and sentries seemed to hold their post. With all the crazy architecture throughout the palace, Naruto's institution for research was by far the plainest and clean-cut building. It was boring old whitewashed stone, rectangular in shape and lacking any kind of windows. As he opened the glass door into the dimly lit hallway, the researchers and the guard stationed there gave him a deep bow, already aware of his intended presence. "Naruto-sama, it's such an honor to finally have you here after so much time. Please, Sail-sama is already waiting for you in the bottom sublevel. Let me escort you there immediately," muttered the nearest researcher, who seemed to be somewhat of a spokesperson for the entire building. He was a thin and gangly bird-like hollow, and from the way he looked Naruto could tell this was a product of one of Sale's particularly nasty experiments. Lumina! Start the elevator, he cried, after Naruto had agreed to be escorted. Across the main foyer of the building, there came an opening against the whitewashed wall, where a circular ball-like elevator came rushing upwards to transport the Emperor and his escort towards the bottom sublevel. Naruto vaguely watched the other hollow punch in some kind of numbers, but he was too absorbed with what was going to happen down there. As the elevator began coming and subsequently come to a halt, a new, polite voice rang out as they both exited the elevator. "Naruto-sama, it is a pleasure to have you here," the voice said, and Naruto was treated to the sight of his head scientist himself, who would be overseeing the procedure. The worm hollow was standing over a short balcony, where below there were a few chairs, an operating table, a workbench, and the bola de evolution, which was closely safeguarded underneath its display. "Sale, I take it you have everything prepared for me, then?" asked Naruto, who was getting restless. "Oh, yes, Naruto-sama. It was no trouble at all, save for configuring the formula necessary for you. Due to your massive amount of Ryatsu, it was decided as such. The equation seems to indicate that you need to apply 28,466 newtons of Ryatsu to the bola at a 37-degree angle. The bola, which contains the essence of the Shinigami, will sink will your Ryatsu's hollow nature and emerge in equilibrium. While you are undergoing the transformation, a team of scientists plus myself will be on standby to contain the process of Aaron-Karisation. So when you are ready, Naruto-sama, I must ask you to take a position on the operating table beside the bola de evolution." Naruto complied, walking down the short set of stairs to take a seat on the operating table. His bola de evolution stood merely 5 feet away from him, and its case was unraveling. Sale walked over to the main database, pushing a few buttons to configure something. All of a sudden, a strange tendril of Ryatsu shot out of a hole next to Naruto, wrapping itself around his right arm. A similar one was already working its way around his left one. "Alright, Naruto-sama. Those tendrils of Ryatsu are configured to limit your Ryatsu output. Once you reach the required amount of Ryatsu output into the ball, the tendrils will automatically cease your Ryatsu output. Once that happens, you must simply keep a hold on the bola." Sale shouted this from his position. The bola's case seemed to moving right towards him. "When these yellow tendrils turn red, I must ask you to immediately clutch the bola and pour your Ryatsu into it. On the count of 3. 3. 2. 1. Now," shouted Sale, as the tendrils turned red. Naruto didn't need any more instructions. He grabbed the ball forcefully, pouring all of his orange Ryatsu into the powerful item, as the bola itself began to react. The energy swirling inside changed from a cool blue to a fierce orange. Naruto himself seemed to have a mix of both the blue Ryatsu and the orange Ryatsu. The tendrils themselves seemed to be strained as Naruto poured Ryatsu into the orb. The atmosphere itself seemed to be tingling as the whole facility began to shake violently. The strain was taking its toll on Naruto as well, as he roared and writhed violently yet continued to hold steady with his Ryatsu. Sale, meanwhile, was typing away like mad on the main database, trying to stabilize everything. This shouldn't be right. The backlash is far greater than any other hollow who has Aaron-Karized, and even we didn't expect such a large reaction to this. I have to. Verona. Stabilize the area. We need to prepare for a total meltdown here. Sale barked at the odd-looking Aaron-Kar who was standing nearby. The round Aaron-Kar bounded off in a panic, before Naruto's voice broke through the din. "No! I've got this," he roared, the Ryatsu output increasing even further. The tendrils around him were starting to look close to breaking. Sale panicked, looking around before settling back down on his seat. "Okay, the first part is almost done. Now comes the hard part of the operation," he said, as he punched in a few codes that appeared on the screen. The orb and Naruto seemed to be glowing with almost black Ryatsu, and a few seconds later the tendrils kicked in, completely cutting off the flow of Ryatsu to the bola. However, what seemed to be a chain of Ryatsu connected the bola to Naruto's hollow hole. Naruto roared as black lines began covering his entire body, and he started to convulse in pure pain. He rose from the table, severing both tendrils like they were nothing, as black Ryatsu exploded from his body in a torrent, knocking back everyone in the room. Ugh, this is the most violent case we've ever seen so far. I need to hurry and contain the blast. Sale grunted, forcing himself back onto his chair. The command to activate something appeared on the screen, and Sale confirmed the process immediately. Four shafts opened down below where Naruto was, and many metallic panels burst forward from the opening, glowing with a deep silvery Ryatsu. They circled around Naruto, wrapping him in a cocoon of metal. The panels contained most of the Ryatsu, and for a few minutes the entire room was quiet. The lesser hollows were completely stunned at the reaction, and Sale was breathing very heavily. It looks like we contained him, he wheezed, laying down at his station. The metal cocoon out on the floor was whirring slightly, apparently struggling to keep the being contained. There was a bang, and a large indentation appeared in the metal. Sale looked up surprised, before the entire cocoon of metal was thrust off, severing the panels and throwing them all over the place. The bola de evolution was thrown out, landing safely away from the center of the chaos. A maelstrom of dust and bright orange Ryatsu obscured their emperor from view, but Sale could make out a very humanoid shape within the center of the maelstrom. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you enjoyed this what if and want to see next part of it, comment down below and let me know. Also share this video with your friends. See you in the next video. Peace.